Fantastic. You can see people arriving. That's wonderful. We'll just wait for a few latecomers. Time are we on? Give it another minute, see if anyone else arrives. Fantastic. Great, I can see everyone. Let's start. Thanks for that, Simon. Let's start then. So, welcome to Grow at Home Artist Talks, a new series where, well, it's not that new now, we've done 3 of them. A series where we'll be hearing from artists and authors about their work and practice. Grow at Home was made possible by the Arts Council England Cultural Recovery Fund, which we're very grateful for. We will be live streaming tonight and recording, and we sometimes use screen grabs for publicity. So please be aware that if your videos are on and you're not comfortable with being recorded, then switch them off. There'll be a Q&A at the end, and if you put your questions into the chat, I'll field them to Dan when he's finished his talk. Talking of which, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dan Coombs. He's an East London-based painter, actually based in Hackney Wick. And Dan is an internationally exhibited artist and is currently senior tutor in painting at the University of East London. He's one of the founders of Turped Banana Painting Programme, an independent art school located in South London. He has written for Turped Banana magazine, as well as online magazine Abstract Critical and other publications. About his work has been said, Dan creates his compositions from studies in collage and paint, which unite his figures with entirely invented surroundings, landscape dream worlds and interior spaces. These are human encounters charged with a mysterious symbolic power. They are explorations of guilt, beauty, and fear of isolation, poignantly, that draw on myth, religion, and psychoanalysis in order to grasp the real within the imaginary. So without further chat from me, let me introduce Dan Coombs.
Yeah, thanks very much, Pete, and thanks to everybody for coming. Yeah, I do, in fact, work in a studio in Hackney Wick, so I'm just quite nearby to Grow, which also has a big presence in the area. And I've been working here for almost 10 years, and it is an extraordinary area of London to work in, that not only the Olympics, but also the incredible building that's going on. So it's very much an ever-changing area. And I'm going to just go back through my work, which goes back, actually the earliest, but I'm going to go backwards through my work. So I'm starting with the absolute present moment. This was like the floor of my studio about 2 days ago. What happened was that when lockdown came in, my work really shifted because since last July, I've been making collages. They're really like collage paintings, and they are made on canvas with paint, but they involve cutting these pours of paint out and arranging them on the canvas to make the picture. And I sort of, as I will hopefully explain, I sort of came to this technique or this method quite gradually through making drawings. But the starting point is always like, as you see here, I lay out loads of sheets of really cheap paper, like just photocopy paper, A4 photocopy paper. And I like very cheap paper because it wrinkles and the paint absolutely soaks into it. I just literally lay out these grids of paper and then just mix acrylic paint, liquid acrylic paint, and just pour it onto each sheet. It's completely random. And I then make the pictures out of these blobs. It's really important to understand, I think, just to understand the technique, that I don't actually cut into the blobs. So I always try and preserve the complete blob. I don't sort of cut bits off the blobs. I do adjust them a bit, but I sort of want to preserve the actual identity of each blob in the final picture. The reason I find this technique so compelling is that I see images in the blobs. It's a bit like the term is pareidolia, where one identifies sort of faces in clouds, but I see images in the blobs, and then I can turn the blobs into pictures. And the reason I find this so compelling is I feel it gives me a direct route from my unconscious onto the canvas. All my paintings, I think right from the beginning, I've been through a lot of different phases, but what links all the work is I've always had the ambition to try and paint images from the mind's eye. So they're not really, they're imaginary scenes. And I've always found, for me, and also this was true of the surrealists, that the way to do this is through collage. So collage really, really runs through everything I do. I think because collage, with one of the things I like about collage is you can move as fast as your mind moves. So if you cut something out of a magazine, or you cut two things out of a magazine, you can put them together absolutely in the instant, like having a thought, whereas drawing for me always is too slow, in a sense, for me to have this direct route out of my mind. I obviously have to draw as well, but the basis of all my work is collage. And the collages I'm just about to show you, which have been made since last July, are, in fact, let me just, well, they're essentially studies for paintings that I'm going to make. So they're quite rough. They don't look, perhaps they won't look very resolved. They're all the same size. They're all quite small, which is 45 by 60 centimeters. And they're essentially studies for paintings I'm going to make in the future. So I'm actually going to draw them out onto canvases, and I want to make quite big paintings from them. And paint them in oil paint, and I'm going to paint them quite precisely. And I love the idea of starting with something that's really random and ending with something that's really precise. So all the images, I'm just going to show you now a lot of these collages I've made in the last 8 months, and then we're going to go back to all the work I've done previously. And I'll try not to talk for more than half an hour. So I might, but I'll try and go back to the beginning. And the collages I'm about to show you, I'll probably just give you the title of each one, because each is a different image. If anyone wants to just interject with any questions, I would be most grateful if anyone wants to say anything as we go along. So hold on. So this is called Ophelia. So you can see here the basic. The subject is, of course, Ophelia from Hamlet, who drowned herself in the river. There are quite a lot. One of my favourite paintings by Millet is based on it. So you can see here the combination of the collage blob that's cut out of paper. And as I say, the blob is preserved in its total integrity. So it suggested the image, the blob suggested the image, rather than me thinking that I wanted to paint this. And then I've glued it to the canvas and painted around it. This is called The Chase. This is called Black Fire. This painting is called Olympia from the Back. And the painting, as of course, as I arranged the blobs, the cut out blobs on the canvas, different subjects suggest themselves to me. And as I was making this, I had the idea of looking at Manet's painting Olympia from behind. So suggesting a kind of interesting relationship between the Olympia herself, who of course is a concubine on display, and her servant who's holding the flowers. I thought it was an interesting perspective. The kiss. This is called Man. This is really a self-portrait. Well, a couple made about 3 or 4 weeks ago when I was, and a friend of mine said this is like a limpet. This head is a bit like a limpet coming out of a shell, which is what I felt like when I made this. Woman. So some of these, this is also called Woman. The blobs of paint are incredibly suggestive, and obviously I project onto them what's going through my mind. So these recent paintings, this is actually called Meditation, but they're all sort of based on that these two women are of a particular woman. They're suggestive of a particular woman, a friend I know. This is a different person who was involved in meditation. This collage is called Meditation because there's this sort of inward movement and this outward movement, coming in through the note, breathing into the mind and coming out of the mind. This is called Woman. This is called The Dog Walk. So all the figures in my paintings, they are based on people I know. I'm not going to say who this is of, but they bring back actual people or situations back quite vividly. This is called The Beach. This is called Woman in the Park. Woman I need to think of better titles because I'm just calling them woman, man. They've got woman, a more erotic picture, horse and rider, which was one of the first ones I did. This picture is called Snow White. So if you know the story of Snow White, this is the moment where the Snow Queen, disguised as the old woman, gives Snow White the poisoned apple. This is called Blood of the Bishop. And it's like a sort of, it was a reaction, having been, I was raised in the church, and the church has a dark side, and I was trying to create an image of a very dark religious figure. To try and make an image that's quite disturbing. This is 3 bathers, and they're 3 particular people who are all part of the same family. Actually, the middle figure is actually my daughter, but it was a memory of going swimming in Hastings. This is based on. This is called The Sea. And this is also called The Sea. This is a much more abstract collage of what happens when the sky and the sea become like the same color. Almost the sea disappears into the sky. I was trying to capture that effect, but also using these random blobs and stained paper on my studio floor. This is called 3 Women, which is like comes from an early memory. So I grew up in South London, moved away when I was about 5, of 3 women dressed up for a church, for a wedding. Nude. It's a woman on holiday. This is called Bouffant Guy. It's quite hard. I'm not even sure where this is called Dog. It's interesting where the images come from, because the images, of course, just appear in a way. It's almost like I haven't even painted them myself. None of these lines, you could see around the edges, there are these white lines, and that just shows you that I'm not really changing the shape of the blobs at all. I'm just sort of cutting them out. I'm not actually doing any drawing. I'm just simply arranging the shapes to make the image. That's very, very important for some reason, although I can't really explain why that's important. But it's like giving up my own will somehow. But I find that the images are always have some sort of resonance and meaning in the same way one might interpret a dream. This is called Nocturne. This is called Woman. This is Nude. This is called Figures in a Landscape. Something really terrible's happening between the 2 figures on the right. And this is called The Meeting. They're made very, very roughly, very fast. Once I've cut out the blobs, I pin them to the canvas with drawing pins. And then once I found the image, I just glue them and then paint around them. 2 women. so before I made these works on canvas, I spent 3 months, and this really goes back to the beginning of lockdown, making drawings on paper. And the collages I've just shown you really evolved out of my drawings. So like the collages, these drawings involve elements that are cut out and glued onto the paper, so collaged onto the paper, combined with gestures made directly onto the paper. This, you can see here, this drawing called Red Monkey, because what this shape here became so like a monkey. You can see where the shapes have been stuck on, but then the background is just poured ink. So at this point, I think this is made with a combination of ink and acrylic. But here, which is an earlier one called Streamside, so I imagined all these animals gathering around a pool of water. I think this was made entirely with ink. This was made with ink, with these figures. So these figures, if you can see, there are about like 4 figures in this piece. These were made by pouring ink onto A4 paper and then cutting them out. And this was the first drawing where I realized that even though I think it's quite crude now, I realized that I could make figures out of blobs of ink. So I was so excited by this. This was another one from this period that's called To the Lighthouse. So it's like sort of slight memory of Virginia Woolf's novel To the Lighthouse, which has many scenes. And Virginia Woolf's one of my favorite writers because she goes into people's minds and out again. She sort of doesn't have a sort of fixed position in relation to people. And, you know, there's something sort of hallucinatory about her writing. So I was thinking of these people on the beach throwing a ball around, or a dog. So sort of creating these images out of the poured paint. These 3 drawings, this was really, when lockdown happened, I was in sort of total despair. It was a very bad moment for me, not just because of lockdown, but for other reasons. And I decided, given that last year, the first couple of months of lockdown, we were all very, very limited in what we could do, and nobody really knew what was going on, and nobody really went outside. So I decided to use the time to relearn how to draw. I mean, I've been working with collage for years, and I thought maybe I should learn to draw again. I should try and teach myself to draw. It's not that I'm bad at drawing. I mean, I'm not. I have drawn a little bit from life, and I've occasionally done life drawing, but I've tended just to focus on collage. And I bought some drawing materials and started drawing with a pencil, then very quickly realized that I had to use ink. I had to use something liquid. So I bought some ink, and then I realized that the more I let go of my own line, the better the drawings became. So it took me a very long time to actually make a drawing that I didn't want to destroy. This was the first drawing I made, and it took me about 4 weeks to get to this point. And I was kind of happy with this. I made it by dipping a sponge in black ink, and I made the sort of tooth shapes very, very fast. In one gesture. And I found that I had to cut the figure. So the figure, the woman, is cut out from another piece of paper and placed. So I found that that element of collage, that placement, was like, I couldn't do without it. I had to have that. So the figures sort of glued on. So in the sense, in trying to make drawings, I found myself going back to collage. So these drawings, which were the beginning of the work I've just shown you, were kind of drawing collages. But I was very, very happy with this drawing because it really, I thought I'd really captured quite a painful state of mind. This one was the second one. And again, you can see the figure has been cut out. And this was the third one. So all this work has really come out of those three drawings. Does anyone want to say anything at this point, just before I show you the rest of my work? If anyone does want to interject, otherwise I'll just go straight in to the rest of my work.
We've got a couple of questions. Do you want
Yeah, please.
Do you want to take them as they're going along?
Yeah, I'd like to take them now. Yeah.
All right. So Gina Southgate, who was our artist last week, these are really evocative and fresh, so gorgeous. Why do you want to stultify them into large, laborious paintings? This really interests me. Sorry, not.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because it's some. I have to say, I can't. My answer to Gina's question is going to be that I can't really answer that at the moment, because I'm yet to make them into oil paintings. I want to see them quite big. That's one reason. But the other thing is that I want to kind of, I sort of like the idea of painting them quite precisely from the collages and taking them. I suppose I've got a sort of classical element to the work, which I quite like. I quite like that discipline. But Gina is absolutely right to raise that. It might not work. It might become academic and.
I mean, she asks if you would be trying to recreate the freshness and energy. I would have thought you would, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in translate. I think translation can be really good, in painting, where you make a gesture on one scale or in a different medium, and then you really try and recreate it on a different scale in a different medium. It can be very, very good. I'm hoping it will be, but I can't really answer that question at the moment. I will be able to in 6 months, but I sort of set myself the task of making 100 collages. So I'm on 91. So once I get to 100, I'm going to start trying to turn them into oil paintings. And but I think Gina's point is really on the absolute cusp of what I've been thinking about. Yeah. As I've been thinking about how to turn them into paintings.
I've got a related question from Jordana, who's from Grow. And it's a question linked to Gina's question. When you said you will paint your blob collages precisely, can you explain what you mean? Will you paint the images closer to the real life, or do you mean precisely as they are but larger, or something else? Or
yeah, I don't mean closer to real life. I mean precisely as they are. So for example, with this painting, with this collage, it will involve having to draw this line that is the shape of the dog who's sort of standing upright with his tongue hanging out, absolutely precisely. And it's the composition is formed out of those very precise intervals between the forms. So I'll be drawing the shapes as precisely as possible.
Brilliant. And one final question: there is someone as Lexi Zelda Stevens says, "Love the one called To the Lighthouse," and our engineer David, who we always forget to thank, but I'm thanking him massively now for getting this together. Just said what size? What size are these works? You may have missed that if you said it earlier on.
They're all 45 by 60 centimeters.
Cool. That's it for now.
Okay, well, that's great. So I'm just going to go back now into my earlier work. So as I say, I've been using this technique of making a study, a collage study first, and then making paintings from that for quite a number of years. It's just this painting actually. Oddly, I'm showing you this because this photo was actually only taken a couple of weeks ago. Because oddly, I made these black paintings, and I made 8 of them, and they were made oddly in January of 2020. So they were made just before lockdown, which is quite strange because I had no idea what was coming. And they seemed to hint at that, the atmosphere or the sense of dread that came. But a friend of mine recently, who came to the studio recently, just said, put them together into one painting. And they're all, and I think they work really, really well together like this. And they're the first paintings I did in black and white. And they're made from this technique of making a study as a collage and then painting from that study. So drawing the composition of the collage very precisely onto the canvas and then painting it. And the collage study, and I'll show you some examples like in a bit, are made with photocopied figures that are distorted. So for example, this figure is distorted on the photocopier. So I turned the figure into a kind of wave formation as I was making the photocopier, just sort of vibrating or moving the book, the photograph, as the scanner was going across. Then when I came to paint it, I sort of sent these ripples through the paint with a palette knife, which I think is quite strange. So this really was only taken a few weeks ago, but it's the last oil painting I made. And I made these panels very quick. They're canvases, so each one is so it's 480, so it's over 4 meters across. And I made it just before lockdown. So these are a series of big oil paintings that I made in 2019 in the summer that are also made from using the same method. I'll try and see if I can find you a collage, but they're made from collages, so they're enlarged. These paintings are all 2 meters across by 200 centimeters across, 150 centimeters high, and they're sort of groupings of figures taken from photographs of figures. And I guess I'm very interested in, this is actually called Alone, because the figures, or even though there are many, many figures in this painting, each figure, I thought it was an interesting title because each figure is kind of alone. This is called The Beach. So I'm sort of interested in what happens when people get together and interact. And they're all in the news because I kind of like, it gives the paintings this kind of slightly sort of mythological quality, timeless quality. I also really like painting the body, and I want to be able to see the body because the body is, as some psychologists suggest, more communicative than language. I mean, I'm interested in that. So kind of like when I was about 28 or something, I started realizing that most communication happens through the body, which sort of really sort of freaked me out at the time. So I'm interested in those kind of interrelationships between figures, trying to capture that. And apparently in psychoanalysis, it's called intersubjectivity, these relationships between figures. Some of these figures are, these are all oil paintings. Okay. So some of these figures are just one figure. So this painting is just made from one figure, or maybe two figures, I can't remember. But as I was making the study, I moved the book so fast through the scanner that the figure just broke up into multiple figures. A bit like when you see oil breaking up on the surface of the water, you know, you get these little splinters of figures. And so sometimes there is just one figure splitting into many figures, or sometimes it's a whole number of different figures. And there was this series as well, so this one, which is where I used, and I became, for a brief period actually of about 6 months, and it's something I really, really want to go back to, became very interested in using Victorian photographs, because I was very interested in the idea of looking into the past. And like everybody else, I'm really interested in Victorian photographs and looking at photographs of people who are kind of sealed into the past. It's very strange. So I used a lot of Victorian photographs of people having picnics, or well-to-do people in the garden with their parasols, and sort of interested in that sort of very mysterious atmosphere of Victorian photographs. This one, I think this building was a school in the East End, but then I think collaged in all these figures of school kids running around. And this photograph, this painting, I remember I cut the different figures from different Victorian photographs and sort of collaged them together. So the figure in the middle is actually Felix Vallotton, the Swiss painter who I'm a huge fan of. So these are a bit rude, but never mind. These are examples of some of the collages I make. So you can see here, so the collages, so the previous works are all oil paintings, so they're all on canvas, so they're the sort of finished paintings. These are much, much smaller, so these are almost postcard size canvases. And you can see there's a combination of collage elements in them. So This was a series I did where I was interested in Sachs images that I took from a Joy of Sachs book and combined them with images from a David Attenborough book of nature. And you can see the collaged photographic elements here and the figures, but combined with paint. So once I've made a collage like this or this, you know, I'll then use that as the study for the oil painting. So I'll draw it out onto a canvas and then paint it, do an underpainting. So I sort of paint all the areas in like a colouring book, then wait for that to dry, and then I paint the final painting very, very fast. This is another collage from a few years ago. This is an example of a collage for a big painting I think I just showed. So you can see they're very rough. The collages, studies are very roughly put together. This is a collage. And then these are some of the paintings I've made from the collages. So these are oil paintings. Wonderful swimming pool. Sort of interested in these groups of figures, but they don't necessarily have any overall narrative. They're just people on the beach. Love the image of people on the beach where their guard is down and they're not quite aware of what they're doing. They're relaxing. So they don't particularly have any sort of narrative. They're just figures interacting. These are a series of paintings I made that are all quite small. And I made a series of nudes where the nude was very, very distorted in the original photocopy. And you can see very clearly here the technique that I use in the oil paint. I get the edge of a palette knife and just go through the paint. I have to paint the figure quite realistically, but just go through it very slowly up and down with a palette knife to create this sort of ripple effect, which kind of really, really interested me for a number of years. And I might go back to it in my new oil paintings. I might use it in the paintings I'm about to make from the new collages. Yeah, I just thought I'd throw these Matisse collages in because, of course, he's very, very important in terms of my thinking about collage. So this collage, you'll all know in Tate Modern, the snail, what's interesting about it is that you couldn't really paint that. You could only make something like that. Very, very beautiful piece of work, in my opinion. It couldn't be painted. It could only be made through collage. All the elements are in a complete relation to all the others. So it's not like a drawing where one thing follows another, one thing happens, then another thing happens, then another thing happens. In this, everything happens at once, you know, and that is really a big move forward, I think. Collage has been part of painting since Cubism. It was brought into painting by Picasso in Cubism, and then it was also very important in Surrealism, but in a kind of different way. In Surrealism, it was about juxtaposing images, whereas in Cubism and in the absolute epitome of collage in Matisse, it's like about it's about having these simultaneous relationships between all the elements and about positive and negative space. So, you know, I've always really loved these works instinctively, the Matisse cutouts, but it's like and this is actually a good example because for years Matisse would make collages to paint from. This is a painting Matisse made, and this was the collage he worked from. So this idea of working from collages, I'm just trying to give myself some credibility. It was used it's been used throughout the 20th century. And the other aspect of my work, which is the uncanny aspect, I'm interested in the unconscious and I'm interested in the dream. And I'm actually interested in the way that dreams are often much more grandiose than the thoughts that are behind them. I'm interested in that dreams have a sort of real conflict behind them. These two paintings were made by Serge Panjakath, who's a Russian patient of Freud. Freud's written the case history, it's very famous, called The Wolf Man. These two paintings were Freud owned, they were in Freud's landing in his house. You can see them in the Freud Museum in Hampstead in a Swiss cottage. And the Wolfman, the case history, if you read it, Sergei Panjakath kept having this recurring dream that he was a little boy asleep, and he woke up and walked to the window of his bedroom and opened the curtains and looked out into the garden, and he saw this tree with these 5 wolves staring back at him and moving in this very strange way. Very sort of haunting image that Freud changed the interpretation of. If you read the case history, it's very interesting what the actual meaning of the dream is. But I'm really interested in the idea of creating an image, an ambiguous dream image. That's really important. An image where there's something behind the image, there's something that's generated the image, but you're not quite sure what it is. It's hidden within the unconscious. That's really, to me, really, really interesting. So just keep going through my paintings, and I'm going to have to really speed up because it's 10 to 7. So Pete, are there any more questions just as I keep going back through my paintings? We're about 5 years old now. Pete, are there any more questions coming in?
There aren't any more questions. There's just a couple of Michael Garvey says, I love the atmosphere in them. Gina,
that's nice. Thank you.
Just gorgeous. You get lots of praise. Don't worry about the time. Just keep going. You're fine.
Okay. Well, these are paintings that I've made in the last few years, really using the same principles as, you know, I've been describing, the same techniques. They're all made from studders, and these are the oil paint. These are another example for collages. This is a collage. So you can see the photocopy in relation to the paint. I love that relationship of paint, photocopy together, photograph against paint. I think that's so mysterious because they're so incredibly different. And I suppose in a way, this is an example of sort of real distortion in the photocopy of the figures. And that was concurrent with a real interest in African sculpture and Papua New Guinea and oceanic sculpture. I'm very, very interested in that. And some of these, like I remember to make this collage, I put all these little men in a plastic bag and shook them and photocopied them. So they were actually moving as the photocopy took place. So there are lots of things you can do with photocopying. I wish I had my own photocopier, but I don't. I've done most of my photocopying in the Ideas store in Whitechapel, and I tend to make hundreds, and I spend £30 and get loads and loads of photocopies done, and then, like with my recent blob paintings, I put them on the floor of the studio and kind of scan them and pick figures out of them. So I suppose one of the sorts of things is that having been at college in the 90s, really during the absolute heyday of conceptual art and conceptually inflected art, I suppose struggled with the ambiguity of my own work and knowing how to explain it, or the pressure to pin down the meanings of the paintings and sort of explain what they mean. And I feel much more relaxed with that now, because I enjoy their ambiguity and don't really feel, and I enjoy the dream atmosphere, and I feel that they're open to interpretation from the viewer. I mean, this painting, for example, after I made it, I mean, some of them do have very specific meanings. So after I made it, I felt very much this was a response to somebody I met who'd become addicted to heroin. And the tail of this dragonfly was a kind of like a syringe. I sort of felt that this image sort of somehow, and all the figures in this painting were kind of dealing with kind of addiction, which I'd vicariously become involved with. And I was sort of just, in a way, making this painting as a way of thinking about that. So that I do feel that the paintings have these very real situations behind them. And I'm interested in, I suppose, the real ambiguities of human relationships, which can't really be resolved particularly into any one meaning. I think so. We've gone back about 10 years. So are you there, Pete? I think that it might be a good time to, shall I keep going back?
Yeah, I mean, I'm here. Yeah, if you want to do some more, I mean,
I can probably do the next 10 years in 10 minutes, the previous 10 years, but
you do that, I think you should carry on. Yeah.
I think that these, that using this technique of making the collage element, the collage study, and then the painting, I've been doing that for 15 years, I think.
Right.
And as I said, it's been through different phases. So these nudes were the first instances where I was actually distorting the figure on the photocopy to generate these different forms. In previous paintings, I used this was a phase where I was using very, very small figures. This was called hell, so they get lost in this sort of hellish space in a kind of what was like a sort of giant nightclub, actually. It reminds me of the Hacienda in Manchester. And using these tiny little figures in these big landscapes. And I did this series of paintings of God. I was brought up religiously. I sort of see, I wanted to paint God as a sort of projection of the human, really. And I had this image of a bearded, I was, at this point, I was using a lot of photographs. I had a book of photographs of people in a nudist colony in Germany in the early 80s. And I had a photograph of this man with a beard playing ping pong. And I just thought I wanted to turn it into a kind of cosmic image. And these are really going, so these are the first instances where I was putting figures really together. These are quite big, these paintings. These are over 2 meters across. And these are some more collages I was making. When I first discovered, these were made really, and we're going back into the noughties now, but these were the first instances where I really discovered this combination of photograph with paint. It was really important to me for some reason. Combining, I don't know, you just get these completely different, it's like different spaces or different times in the photograph and in the photograph and the painting. So these are some of the collages. And then before that, these were some large works which were shown in the Approach a long time ago now, 15 years ago, where I used, these were the first collage paintings I made. And and again, I was interested in using the nude. These were photographs from the nudist colony that I put into this sort of painted landscape. And this piece I made of using found objects, snakes, plastic snakes, and a manicure set and Christmas decorations that I bought from Woolworths, glued on to the canvas around this sort of mirrored image of some Hare Krishnas, photograph of some Hare Krishnas in Oxford Street. And I made it because I really admired the Hare Krishnas. I thought it was wonderful to be that joyful and optimistic. I wanted some of that energy at the time. So these were all paintings that combined sort of abstract painting with paint. And before that, so going back really to the 90s, so a long time ago, just like after I graduated, I was using found objects to make assemblages, and you can see the relation of collage and painting. Obviously, I was very much going live with the collage, and then and using objects. I was working in Camberwell, and I really loved just getting junk from the street and putting it together to make these. They were kind of painting reliefs or collage painting reliefs that again had sort of dream meanings. I was very excited by the fact I couldn't predict what the outcome of these things was going to be. So all these unconscious meanings sort of creep into them. This was the first mammoth assemblage where I just threw everything I could into it. And the early paintings, which were made at the Royal College of Art or just after that, so very much the first statements I made really as a painter. It was interesting. These very, very early paintings from the 90s, the mid 90s, were like made from appropriated sources, you know, but they were also made in the same way. I made a collage first and then made the paintings from the collage. And I kind of kept that quiet at the time for some reason, because I sort of thought I was cheating. But this painting, for example, was put together from various images found in Ladybird books, like Peter and Jane, Ladybird books. That's it. I've reached the end.
Well,
I'd love some comments if anyone's brave enough to say anything.
We've got lots of comments. Some more questions would be brilliant. I mean, I've got Helly says some have very surrealist feel to them, and a few remind me of Francis Bacon, also fabulous. Simon Cole, who's actually on this group, Grow Talks on Wednesday, says William Blake vibes. I said ha because I laughed.
Who's that?
That was Simon Cole.
Who's William Rake? I don't know.
William Blake.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm not going to argue with that. Yeah, I love William Blake. Yeah, amazing.
Jordana, I thought was quite a poignant question. Was like, how do you choose your color palette? I mean, it's quite, especially in these ones that you're showing now, that the color palette's quite unusual, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I do it completely instinctively. I think it's really important to let the colors become quite muddy, actually. I think that, and I would recommend, actually, if there anyone here who's just starting painting, not to clean your brushes too much, because I think, but what's good is I would say with color to keep the colors quite muddy, but then also have some clean brushes with some really bright colors you can then bring in. I think it's all about, I mean, you're a painter, Pete, so you know about this. But
I totally agree with you.
It's important.
Dirty brushes keep it unified.
And actually, like I remember the student was saying, how do you paint flash? And I remember just off the top of my head saying flash is like colored mud. I thought I was quite proud of that comment, because if you think about skin tone, and then if you think about different kinds of colors of mud, that kind of range of browns and olivey greens, and do you know what I mean? When you look into the canal, or those kind of dense, pungent colors, that it's very important to be in tune with those colors as well as the really bright colors, you know, the oranges or the pinks.
I don't know, it's a question. the snail, the Matisse one that we've all seen at the Tate so many times, and it's almost become like Bohemian Rhapsody of painting or something.
Yeah, that's a good
overplayed, but amazing piece of collage. And you think about the cubists who use collage for kind of texture and to kind of introduce a jarring realism, and Hannah Hock, who used collage in kind of figuration to kind of create these juxtapositions, and then maybe someone like Kurt Schwitters with his Merzbildung, who kind of made a whole kind of world out of found object. But the Matisse one is like, it's kind of more pure than painting, isn't it? It's just coloured paper. There's no imagery at all. It's completely created out of colour. It's quite an unusual collage, isn't it? That one in the history of collage before that happened.
Yeah, it's I'm just going to it. I mean, it's what the great mystery of it is, that it's purely relational, I think, as opposed to painting. So everything happens at once. It's interesting because when I went to the Tate Modern show of the Matisse cutouts, I couldn't work out how he'd glued them so well, because there wasn't a single smudge of glue. In my own collages, I get glue everywhere.
Probably under the system.
They were sent off, after he died, they were sent off to Paris to picture restorers, and they were traced and then glued. But before that, because all the cutouts were made in the last 7 years of his life, as you know.
He was very ill, wasn't he?
And he had cancer, I think. But they're all held together with pins, apparently. And he was really paranoid that they weren't going to survive. They were just going to fall apart, which I think is really interesting. For some reason, I don't know why that's interesting, but it is to me.
Lexi Zelda Stevens says, I was interested in what you said about coming through the heavily conceptual era. Do you feel that things have changed now? So that's a very good question.
Yeah, they have changed, because in the 90s, it was perfectly, and you will remember this as well, Pete, it was perfectly acceptable just to sort of attack people just simply for painting. I mean, it's hard to understand. Students
someone physically threatened me when I was on my MA at Chelsea. A conceptual sculpture in the bar said, if you don't shut up about painting, I will mash your face in. And my girlfriend at the time said, like, I was terrified because he was much bigger than me, but she said, like, well, maybe you wouldn't be able to do that. It's an interesting proposition, isn't it? And I was like, shut up.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, and I mean, it was interesting just when I first exhibited my paintings in the 90s, just the sheer antagonism I received, just simply because they were paintings. And I kind of feel, I don't know whether, I'd be interested to hear whether you agree with this, Pete, but there's this kind of deep Protestant desire to, it almost goes back to the Civil War, I think, to destroy the image and to push language to the forefront, you know, somehow. It's a kind of deeply embedded in the English psyche. And I think maybe, and of course, conceptual art did want to put an end to painting. That was its agenda, at least initially. So it was, the battles people had in art school were very bloody. Did you have the same experience?
Yeah,
they were very.
I remember being at Chelsea, and I'm contemporaneous with Damien Hirst, and literally that was all blowing up at Goldsmith, and the kind of sudden change that people had. It was like they were suddenly. I mean, it's all very interesting art, looking back on it, but they were suddenly transfixed by this, the tutors, and please read post-structuralism and stuff like this. And I had no interest in it. I kind of looked at it and I just found it destructive personally in terms of an art practice. And I just wanted to get on with things. But it's really interesting. I've never heard it presented in terms of iconoclastic Puritan behaviour.
I've actually, it's a little theory of mine. I've never.
It's a very good theory
before. I hope I don't get into trouble, but I sort of
death to the Roundheads.
I do feel there's an iconoclastic element to conceptual art. I mean, but it's interesting now because I think
none of them could paint anyway, Dan. That's the thing. They were crap. It was much easier to write a load of text and exhibit a shovel next to a wall,
Yeah, and
a photograph of a shovel next to it as well.
It's very strange, actually, because thinking back to that time and feeling like a total outsider because of being a painter. And I was lucky enough to, and I know he was a colleague of yours, but I had Peter Doig as my tutor at the Royal College, and he was a real pioneer, I think, in regard to painting. But even he was a kind of outsider in the 90s. It's very, very strange that things have completely reversed and now everybody loves painting. In a way, I'm slightly nostalgic for the time when everybody hated painters, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
it's kind of odd situation because now students love painting, everybody's painting, there's no problem with it. It's just another genre.
I just see it as a sort of one of those kind of weird battles that happen in kind of maybe sort of arch neoliberal prosperous times when people like Blur versus Oasis, like who gives a damn, it's just like, and I think the odd thing is mentioning Peter Doig, who was like, I was at college with him. He's obviously he was like 10 years older than me, and he was very determined in the sense that he knew what he's doing. He didn't need to engage in those kind of struggles that we were kind of torn up in, really, and caught up in because we were younger and more influenced. But at the same time as all that stuff, that's when he made his name for himself as a painter. I think he brought a lot back. I think he was very pioneering in a sense, and also Chris Ophelia as well. For black art, who was black British art, which was very they're only talking about it now. Really.
Yeah. I mean, they were definitely pioneers, and I mean, it was. As you say, I was a lot younger, and so it was a gradual. I sort of felt like I had to work thing, but I mean, even I was still having these arguments even 5 or 6 years ago on Facebook with people who were saying painting is bourgeois, painting is commodified, etc. So
I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't. I mean, I don't sell very much work, so it's not very commodified for me. So
yeah.
I haven't reached that stage of petit bourgeois yet. But I've got Lexi says I found it still lay very heavily on things when I graduated in 2004. I went to study dance because body and visceral perspective was so invisible in the conversation.
Sorry, read that last sentence again. I missed that. What did you say? You're muted, Pete. Sorry.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. Okay. I found it still lay very heavily on things when I graduated in 2004. I went to study dance because the body and the more visceral perspective was so invisible in the conversation.
Yeah.
I get what she's saying. Yeah, I get what they're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as well because figure eight, I mean, not only was painting out, but figuration was really out. I mean, so the idea of depicting the figure, and I mean, I've done a lot of teaching in the last few years in art school, and I found there's been this massive space to bring the life model back in to art school. I think it's really important to draw from the figure, but not necessarily in a dry academic way. But I think there are all sorts of things you can do with life drawing, like you can get performers, you can get dancers, and that idea of looking at the naked human figure, I think, is so healthy. So I've done a lot of classes, a lot of projects using the model and getting people to draw from the model and then collage with those drawings. And I think dance is such an interesting area because if you're a figurative painter, because it's kind of interesting. And also in psychoanalysis, there's this phrase that the unconscious is the sort of speaking body. I'm very interested in that, as the body is the sort of expressive thing in itself. So, yeah.
Yeah. Jordana says, who is an artist as well, a very good artist, but often spends more time doing grow stuff like me as well. And, it must be very frustrating. She says, this has been so inspiring and fascinating. I'm really drawn to collage, but couldn't put my finger on why. It resonated with me. It resonated with me about how collage cuts through to the very subconscious. And I think that's why I enjoy it so much and find it comes more naturally from drawing. Very motivating for me to get back into it. So you've inspired someone, Dan. She's
that's great. Yeah,
go down the pan, and she's going to do art again.
Yeah, well, that's great. And I mean, I think collage is something you can do anywhere as well. I mean, apparently Kurt Schwitters used to carry a cardboard box around with him, with like all his bus tickets and flyers and leaflets, and he would just get off. There's a story of him getting off a train and immediately kneeling down on the platform, opening his box, and he couldn't stop collaging. He kept all his pieces with him at all times. So, and he was just constantly making collages just in this box. He had this piece of board support in the box and all and he just never stopped working. So it is a very good medium practically as well.
Well, very, very, just on you're absolutely on the money, because Simon Cole of Hackney Tours, who's doing our talk on Wednesday night, please attend. It'll be absolutely amazing. He's a brilliant artist and a brilliant presenter. He said, I've used collage to provoke thought on subconscious prejudice with youth. We cut up magazines to make mood boards of gender.
Yeah. I mean, I had this student recently who was a bit stuck, and I said to him, and he was also wanting to take things apart, a bit. And I just said, just go and buy a copy of Hello magazine and start cutting it up. And the results were really amazing.
I think it's gone on for a long time. People, not this talk, but people using photographic images, and there's a very famous picture that they used to drill into us at Life Drawing on Foundation, and it's a kind of middle-aged man, a little bit portly but still quite built, naked, and it's a painting by Matisse. It's a kind of early study, and of course, when you're at Foundation College, maybe rightly, you want to jump straight into like, oh, look, that's what Matisse did, collages. I'm just going to do that. I'm going to be an abstract artist. And they tell you to do all this kind of, look, Matisse had a model in the studio and he drew this, and, you know, put your photographs away and get your charcoal out and look, you know. And then years later, I actually found a photograph of exactly the same figure in exactly the same pose in a book about Matisse, because he did it from a photograph, you know.
Yeah.
It wasn't a life drawing after all.
I know. And it's interesting that, because I think you can do both. I mean, this is what I've been developing this way of teaching, where I get people to draw, you know, do life drawing, but then combine that with collage. You can draw from life and collage. You can draw from life and use photographs. You can do that, everything together. There's no sort of there's no kind of you know, there's no kind of better position. It's not like drawing isn't necessarily any better than collage. And you know, we've got this thing as well in England of people who sort of fetishize sort of traditional skills, but all these things should be combined.
Yeah, of course. I mean, when you talk about combination, I'm going to do another plug as well, because we're doing book clubs, and we've got Sadie Murdoch doing one of the book clubs about her, about an art book, of, you know, desert island book. And someone like Sadie Murdoch, who people should check out, is she actually photographs herself with collage attached to her body, and then works them into kind of these pictures that almost like remind me of those fairy pictures from the Victorian era. How did they do that? They, you know, and it's kind of like, well, they actually photographed with the collage on it, and refer to Hannah Hawke and collage history and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'd like to. I haven't seen Sadie's work recently. I'd like to catch up with that.
Well, Simon says thanks, and great event. So he's on Wednesday, which will be a tour of Hackney. There'll be a lot of street art in that, which is, you know, if it's good, I'm up for that as well.
Oh, is he's doing a tour of Hackney Wick, a virtual tour of Hackney Wick, is he, on Wednesday?
He did last time, yeah, and I think it's the same. I mean, the thing with Hackney Wick is if you do a virtual tour every week, someone's probably thrown up a new skyscraper with luxury flats in it. So the landscape is changing. Gina says, no borders, you can do anything. Traditional skills are valuable, though. Of course, yeah.
She said what? Sorry, say that again.
Gina says, no borders. You can do anything. Traditional skills are valuable, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you can do everything.
Yep. Simon says it's about process. Lexi says, thanks, Dan. Really want to see your work, and thank you, Grow. Well, thank you for attending. It's really good, brilliant audience. And Simon says he's clarifying what's happening. He's a psychogeographic walking artist.
Okay, is that on Wednesday? Because I'd love to
on Wednesday,
come on to that. So that'd be really great. I mean, I am actually in Hackney Wick. I'm in my studio now in Hackney Wick, but it's always very interesting to get a different perspective on the area, and it is an absolutely fascinating part of London that's just rapidly changing, isn't it? Continually changing. So
yeah, it's very much that. I mean, I think probably is a good time to wind it up, Dan. Yes, Gina's saying tomorrow. Yes, Simon's tomorrow. They're having a conversation. I'm out of this conversation. They're talking amongst themselves. All I'll say is, like, absolutely a fantastic talk, and fantastic audience. Really brilliant questions. Absolutely love seeing your work. It's brilliant. You know, and you probably one of the last artists in Hackney Wick. You know, he's been there for a long time. So
yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for everyone who came, and see you tomorrow night if you want to see Simon's tour of Hackney Wick. And
yeah, that'd be great.
Great. Thank you very much, Dan Coombs. Good night.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me, and
absolute pleasure, mate.
See you soon.
Thank you.